Hello and welcome to IPC Touchpoints, our expert insight series. Today we'll be talking about building IPC program momentum in post-acute care settings and how to stay ahead of regulatory requirements. I'm your host Abhi Zadav, Director of Healthcare Insights at Georgia Pacific. I'm fortunate to be joined by Missy Travis, seasoned infection preventionist and founder of IPNC Consulting. This is a particularly challenging time for post-acute care settings, and by post-acute, I mean skilled nursing facilities, inpatient rehabs, independent and assisted living facilities. Facilities are doing their best to build their IPC programs, but they're also facing a lot of CMS regulatory requirements. Can you provide us a snapshot of the challenges that you're seeing?
Yes, so many of the challenges remain the same as they have always been. A lot of the regulations are based on the CDC guidelines, but the challenge as the infection preventionist is, one, to know what the guidelines are and the regulations, but then also to get the healthcare workers to actually follow the regulations and the guidelines, because we can create wonderful policies and procedures, but if no one follows them, they're useless. So I think it's getting to know what the regulations are and how to implement in your facility. But basically, the guidelines are just created so that we have a safe environment for residents and for our staff that is led by a person who is qualified to lead that infection prevention program, if you were to sum up the regulations.
And as you think about the biggest regulatory changes and requirements, which of those do you think will have the biggest impact in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yes, that's a great question. I think for long-term care facilities, it's the requirement for having a part-time infection preventionist. A dedicated infection preventionist is crucial to having a successful infection prevention program, and this is something that has been lacking in this setting for many years.
That's a very important point, having a dedicated infection preventionist on staff being so critical. How is it going right now?
Yeah, so I think that most facilities have designated an infection preventionist. That being said, I see a couple of issues. One is that the infection preventionist oftentimes has another role, such as assistant director of nursing or director of nursing, which can make it difficult because those are very important roles as well and could oftentimes pull you from your infection prevention duties. In my experience, I've had dual roles before as well, such as infection prevention and employee health, which actually go together quite nicely. So I think if you're going to have dual roles, it has to be, ones that support each other. So that's one thing that I see. The second issue is that oftentimes the infection preventionist has just been, selected maybe on Monday. You're going to be the infection preventionist now, voluntold, as we like to say. And so that makes it very difficult for that person because, number one, they don't have the passion or the interest to do infection prevention, and it's not an easy job. So if you don't have the passion to learn more and to be the infection preventionist, it's going to be very difficult for you to fill that role.
Makes a lot of sense. Going back to what you mentioned about the CMS regulatory requirements, could you provide any recommendations or resources that could help our viewers?
Yes, another great question. I would recommend first doing a gap analysis, which with a gap analysis is something that's very easy to do, and most people are probably already doing it. And basically what it is you look at where you are right now, take an honest look at where your facility is, and then look at those requirements and recommendations on the other side where you want to be, and then what is the gap between the two. And that's just what we call a gap analysis. And so once you've identified what the gap is, then you can make a plan to address the gap. But you've got to know what the gap is first to be able to make an effective plan. The other thing is there are a ton of websites out there available. There's, credible websites, CDC, CMS, OSHA, your state health department website. They all have valuable resources for IPs. The other thing for CMS is oftentimes they will create interpretations for their regulations because sometimes they can be difficult to interpret. And so they will actually go in and essentially make cliff notes for you so that you can look through and know what that regulation actually means. means. The other thing that I recommend is to sign up for emails, listen to podcasts, listen to webinars. These sometimes are free resources that can also contribute to you building your infection prevention education. And then finally, and probably most importantly, ask for help. There are other people out there that are seasoned in infection prevention, and just ask for their help. You're not alone. There's other people out there who are willing to help you.
So you mentioned quite a few organizations that are doing great work, as well as reaching out to your network. What other training programs would you recommend for our viewers to stay compliant and build their IPC programs?
CDC has a great program for long-term care facilities. It's an online educational module, and at the end you get a certificate for completion. It's outstanding. They give tools, very easy to understand. APIC has also developed a certification for long-term care infection preventionists, so now they have their own certification specific to their setting. AHCA, NCAL also has a certification program, as well as NADANA. These are organizations that are very familiar to long-term care settings and people that work in long-term care settings. So those are also resources for them. They're all different. They all are focused around infection prevention, but maybe have different perspectives or the delivery of the material. So I would just recommend looking at each one to see which one would be best for your particular setting. And then there's forums and groups that you can join. There are a lot of online forums that are made up of seasoned infection preventionists, novice, those who are kind of intermediate in the middle. So if you're just looking for a place where you can throw out a question, this happened in my facility, what is everyone else doing? That's a great place to do that and get some good answers.
So those were some great certifications, and I want to probe a little bit into the forums and groups you mentioned. Where can our viewers find some networking opportunities where they can get tips and intel and best practices?
The state health department is a great resource. Go to your state first, see what's going on in your state. Oftentimes they have free resources, very willing to help. Your local APIC chapter is another place to go, because these are IPs that live in your community. It's supported by APIC. Oftentimes there's going to be resources and networking opportunities. Other local professional chapters that meet in your community that have involvement in infection prevention can be valuable. The other one that I think is also very valuable that may be a little counterintuitive is to reach out to other infection preventionists that work at similar facilities or similar healthcare networks that are also doing infection prevention. And oftentimes we don't think of this because we think of those other places as being our competitors, but for infection prevention, it can be very valuable to reach out to those colleagues, especially in settings that are similar to yours, because you can collaborate, you can talk about things. When I first started out infection prevention, this was one of the first things that I did. I reached out to infection preventionists at the other local hospitals. We became friends. They were my mentors. They're retired now, but that was one of the best resources I had when I first started out in infection prevention.
These are some great resources. Thanks for sharing those. And as our audience is thinking about building their IPC programs and staying ahead of requirements, do you have any final words of encouragement for our viewers?
I would say you are not alone. First of all, there are lots of people out there to help support you. Find a mentor, find a group to get support. Also, find those regulations and recommendations, look at them yourself, and this goes along with doing that gap analysis, which would be my third point. Really get in there and figure out where do you need to be and where are you right now, so that you can make a proactive plan going forward with infection prevention for your facility.
I want to thank you, Missy, for joining us here at Georgia Pacific. As we like to say, healthcare experts meet hygiene experts, and we value experts like you who want to keep the healthcare community involved.
Thank you. This has been a very interesting conversation.
And folks, I hope you'll join us for additional installments of IPC Touchpoints.